Hello, I'm here with Susan Lynch, the playwright, this morning. Good morning, Susan.
Morning, Nessa.
And Susan's new play, Detention, has just been showing at the Smock Alley Theatre in Dublin, down by the Liffey. And I went along to one of the performances. It was very enjoyable evening, even though we felt rather shook up at the end because it's very funny, but it's also rather nasty in its implications. And I'm going to ask Susan a few questions about it now, but just to give the background, there's something a bit Orwellian about it. It's not just there's a distortion of language. Some words are not in favour with the political regime that is behind the actual events of the play, and also we have numerous false facts, and there's a lot of distortion of history in there. So I just wonder if you could explain the title to me, because I think that word, even detention, isn't a word that the characters are supposed to use.
So detention, as a title, it indicates that kind of obligation that we all had in school to go and do something. You've done something naughty, so you're held back after class and carry out some repetitive exercise that you're told is good for you. But hey, like writing out lines in our day. But in Dublin, in 100 years from now, where detention is set, we have a society-wide activity called um, historic reenactments or patriotic reenactments centres that we have to attend when we step out of line. And as the play progresses, we find out that you can step out of line for the most trivial of reasons, and using a lot of freedoms that we would take for granted nowadays. But in the future, 100 years in a dystopian Dublin, you get stuck into tension if you've done if you've fallen foul of a myriad of rules and slights to the political regime that's in power, and you carry out this thing called slang detention, where you run historical reenactments from Irish history and world history to bump up your social compliance score and get you back into the norm. And it usually takes 2 to 3 days of running these exercises, and you're back in play.
Okay,
And that follows that's the core of the play.
right. And one of the reenactments, or what one that they were talking about, was something that I hadn't realised, that apparently Mary Robinson was completely famous for something else that I hadn't realised. Yeah,
Indeed, in this future world,
yeah, yeah.
we've lost our current understanding of history, and it's been reshaped for us, shall we say? So Mary Robinson won the Eurovision for Ireland in 1980s, singing that well-known song "What's Another Year," and it was a lament
Yeah.
for Irish feminism and the lack of suffrage that Irish women in the 1980s were suffering under, and denied their right to vote. We didn't have universal suffrage at the time. So Mary took the opportunity, working with a group of like-minded women. They wrote the song in a workshop session down in Dingle,
Yeah.
in the late 70s, and they figured Mary herself was particularly behind it. She wanted the Eurovision to be the platform because she felt it had the most focus, that they weren't really winning hearts and minds with the political arguments. That she felt a song, you know, the heart of the Irish nation, a song would bring them together and rally them behind the cause for votes for women, which it did. So, what's another year? And the famous victory in the 1980s, or in
Right.
1980, brought us suffrage.
Right. Okay. So it's not just a couple of facts here and there. The whole backstory is worked out about they recorded it in Dingle, and the emotions of the song, and right. Okay. And to what extent? I mean, Orwell wrote 1984, hoping that it would never actually come to pass, but we're starting to see America move in that direction. To what extent are you worried that in 100 years' time we could be seeing what your play is about?
Rewriting our history and
Yeah.
under kind of a bro-oligarchy totalitarian form. Yeah, so I'll tell you what, Nessa, when I started writing it, and it's been around for a year and a half in different forms, I kind of struggled a little bit to try and get some of the ideas across to people. Um, and I would always say it's not, I'm not saying that this is possible, but I'm saying it's, sorry, I'm not saying it's probable, but I'm saying it is possible.
Yeah.
And I think those two so that if you compare the two chances, they have changed over time, and it's become ever daily. It feels like it's a little bit more probable, and people are much more willing to take on board the ideas in it, and around history being so vulnerable at the moment. The concept, which we get to a little bit later on in the play, outside of the piece you saw, where we have moved to a post-literate society. So we have lost contact with our
Right.
historical sources.
Yeah.
And we are now in the age of deep fake, where should you want to, you can make any version of history real, and accessible to people. And you could recreate the documents, you could recreate the media around historic events, but more importantly, you can create them around current events. So I don't know if you saw the video that somebody shared of a Trump resort in Palestine. It
No.
just they're frankly it's terrifying. So to get back to your point, um, I truly hope that doesn't happen, but I think we have to be aware that our media is no longer, and I don't mean media in terms of create. I mean the actual physical assets that we count as media, that we count as sources,
Okay.
are fallible and no longer what they were.
Okay. Right. Right. Yeah. Um, so in the last 18 months, it's become more feasible. I mean, so that's not just relating to Trump, is that what are the other factors that are making this more plausible as a
Sure, the
likely
uptake
scenario?
of in the uptake of generative AI, amongst everybody, about
Yeah.
common uses of generative AI, the availability of these tools and the speed at which these tools are progressing, and
Yeah.
the quality, shall we say, of the outputs. So
Yeah.
it was 18 months ago relatively easy to identify an image that had been faked or created through generative AI. I don't know if you remember, there was a famous picture of the Pope Francis, wearing a white puffer Balenciaga jacket.
Yeah.
And, that was the one for me that tipped it, because that required multiple looks to try and see where it had been created. If you could see the seams, as it were, not to pun too much on that, pulled it together. And they really weren't there. They weren't visible anymore. So we are at a level now, I think, where digital or generative AI assets are coming out of various systems: voice manipulation, video manipulation, image generation. Then in a way that means they look so
Right.
authentic and so real that the effort that was previously required to recreate these and the tricks you had to use to create a deep fake have fallen by the wayside, and
Okay.
they are now available with a minimum amount of effort
Okay.
to create.
Right. You mentioned to a post-literate society. I mean, do we need
Mm.
to try to hang on to our literacy? Is it going to be dangerous if we aren't really reading anymore?
Kind of split two ways on that one, because I mean, you're right. Yes, there will be dangers. So I think if we were to reflect now on our relationship with Latin texts,
Yeah.
I certainly am arm's length. I certainly rely on people to translate them and write them out in English for me, and to tell me that's what Tacitus said, yada yada yada. I can't read Latin, nor can I speak ancient Greek or read ancient Greek or any of these traditional sources. And so much information, so much knowledge, so many historical texts were encoded in Latin as it became that universal language. Um, I would point to that as being our potential
Okay.
relationship to our spoken languages or our written languages at the
Oh,
moment.
right.
So I'm not saying it will go. I'm
Yeah.
not saying we will never, but I think we will receive our information verbally. I think all such information or visually, all information will be through the system, whatever system that is, so that it's
Okay.
all going to be digitized and computational. So stuff that exists outside of that, hearsay, our thoughts, um, texts that haven't been digitized or brought within into the system, will be less and less. will become more important. So our memories, our chat, our understanding, but that will fade over time. And we will just spend, as humanity will pull all of its information from systems, most likely verbally. So why would you read a text if you can have it spoken to you, or if you can have it played out in a video form, if you can access it more readily? Why would you spend the time and effort learning to read if all
Oh,
of this information was available in another source?
yeah,
I don't know if you've noticed recently anybody under the age of, I don't know, 35, 40 with a newspaper tucked
yeah.
under hand
No,
as they
no,
walk
no.
around looking for their morning coffee.
Yeah,
So it's it's just it's not necessarily a bad thing wholesale, but it is a trend, and it's the way we're trending, I think. And yeah, I would see it. So there's a lot to be said about this and a lot to kind of engage. I'm certainly not in any way expert on it, but I see it happening, and I feel we will end up with this, as I say, Latin-esque
yeah.
interaction with our history, with our sources, with our content that isn't digitized.
Okay, right. Part of the reason that we're talking is because my grandfather, Robert Dudley Edwards, was the person who really instituted our archives in Northern Ireland, sorry, in Ireland. The National Archives Act, which created our national archives, was achieved in 1988, part after 40 years of efforts on his behalf. And I've just written his biography, which is coming out as you know. So I guess I'm just asking you that in some ways he was very prescient in wanting to tie down the facts of our past and the original document. But are we losing the battle in some ways because we're not actually coping with the aspect of it that you're talking about, the AI? And for instance, we don't have government ministers are WhatsApping to each other, but we haven't even begun to set up a system
Mm.
which will keep a record of those WhatsApps. Are these important issues?
I think they're hugely important. So firstly, the I think the need for a national archive has been so well established and understood by the the scholars, the citizens, and the historians of Ireland that it's an absolute, a must-have. Um, if we don't have source material to go back to, we run the risk of manipulation of historical facts. I mean, as your grandfather's favorite quote from Napoleon shows, historical facts are problematic at the best of times.
Yeah,
But we need the documentation to go back to, and to start our conversations and our discussions, debates from that point. Now, how does that play out for us now? You make the great point that a lot of digitized interactions on um, messaging platforms which encrypt content, and it's their selling point that they encrypt the content end to end, means they're not available for archival purposes without the goodwill of one or more participants in those individual or group chats. So I think it's extremely problematic, not least of which for freedom of information, but also going forward that we will not have access to that.
yeah.
There's a few challenges to it, as well as the willingness of people to share that information, the way we treat what's there now as ephemeral culturally, and we do that with our tweets, with Telegram posts, with our Instagram. It is intended to be ephemeral. Is anything in that space being archived?
Mm,
You know, do we all institutions need to come up with policies around how they're going to archive this?
mm,
And it's not just as simple as saying, yes, we'll archive it. It will need significant investment, and it will need technological understanding to make sure that those sources are maintainable over the years. Um, I'll give you an example. If I were to hand you a 3.5 inch floppy, or worse still, a 5 inch floppy
yeah,
disk, and say, oh, well, all of my historical letters are there, how would you, are you going back to try and dig out the old Commodore 64 PC that's somewhere in the back
yeah,
of the garage and hope that works and run it up again? And so again, it's boundaries and barriers.
yeah,
Similar thing to kind of language moving to that Latin state. It's not that it's going to disappear and that those media might physically be available, but if we
yes,
don't invest in an infrastructure to make them accessible,
yeah,
they
right,
will be lost.
yeah,
But yeah, no, I'm a big fan. I mean, how we introduce this, I don't know, because it's relatively down the priority list, isn't it, at the moment, about how uh, comms between people in government get managed, and our current discussions online get managed and archived. How we introduce that and make sure our moments are captured is yeah, down the priority list, and it will need quite a bit of work and
Mm.
effort, and unfortunately, budget to to come up with a solution that ensures future generations have proper archives and proper access to our sources.
Yes, thank you very much. I can see it's a very serious issue because we're never going to have campaigns for elections won on the basis that we need to put more money into archives. On the other hand,
I don't think it's a winner.
it's not a winner. No, no, I don't think so. No. On the other
We need
hand,
Dudley back to actually,
we
we need
need
somebody
Dudley
of the
back.
scale. No, we really do. Somebody of that kind of influence come and sort of say,
Yeah.
this is important. You know, who's carrying that mantle now?
Because I think it's important because it actually goes into the country's soul. If you can't prove what your past is, you're untethered. You're yeah. Um, okay. Well, thank you very much. That's a fascinating insight into all of that. I wonder if you could just. I think you had one or two other insights into history that I didn't know about, as well as Mary Robinson. If you could just
I
leave us
think
with
you,
one or two of
yeah,
them.
one or two of those, yeah. Well, I mean, I was surprised that people were speaking about Saint Patrick in relationship to animals and snakes and banishing, because in 100 years from now, in the world of detention, it's very clearly the Welsh
Oh,
he banished from Ireland, and cleared out all of the enclaves there.
yeah.
Or you might also be referring to Julius Caesar's arrival, where he strong-armed Strongbow when he landed on the in the harbour at Waterford in 54 BC, a couple of years before the or just before he arrived to Ramsgate over in London, over in England. So yeah, there was a number of like historical events that we just got the wrong end of, really.
Well, thank you very much. I must say I've been a bit hazy on that now, but you've corrected me. Thank you. Okay. Thank you very
Yeah,
much,
Clarison.
Susan.
Yeah, good to know. Good to know. That'll get you past the Leaving Cert history exam, no other.
Thank you. Bye bye.